In this presentation, we'll talk about some basic principles of information design for presentations. So we'll talk about a number of principles, including alignment, contrast, hierarchy, and text and fonts. Keep in mind that this is a very brief overview of what can be a very deep topic and is designed to basically get you started with understanding the basics of these principles for doing presentation design. So let's start with alignment. Alignment is when two or more objects have an understood relationship to one another. And you can think about alignment in terms of things being centered, left aligned, right aligned, basically lined up in some way. And it's important because when we see objects on a page or on a screen, our eye is really good at subtly seeing the differences of whether things are lined up correctly or not. In fact, we might even think of this as something that's subconscious, where we don't notice that something is misaligned, but it gives us a vague, uneasy sort of feeling. So there are some tools that are built into Google Slides for helping us align things well, and I'm going to take a second to show you those right now. Whenever we make a Google Slide presentation, we can use one of the example templates that come with Google Slides. And as we make a new slide, one thing that you'll notice is that I have a number of different options. When I just click the plus, however, it gives me a basic slide, and we can see immediately that these two things are lined up, the title and the place where we can click to add text. So Google Slides starts off by helping us make sure that things are aligned. We have to kind of work hard, in fact, to make things not be aligned correctly. However, if we were to use a blank slide, all of a sudden we start to get into territory where we have to do more alignment ourselves. And there are some simple tools in Google Slides that can help us do that more effectively. One tool that we can use is the guides feature in Google Slides. So as you can see, there's already a set of guides that are set up exactly in the center of this slide, showing us this and this guide so we can understand how the screen is set up. If I wanted to make sure that some objects were aligned specifically at 1 inch from the left and 1 inch down from the top, I could drag those guidelines out, place my objects or elements, and then turn off those guides so that they're no longer seen. Guides aren't seen in presentation mode. They're just there to help us line things up as we're building a slide. So for example, I might put a shape in here like a rectangle. I might put an image in here from Google Drive. And I might want those two things to be aligned vertically. So I can use this guideline that I made right here by dragging down 1 inch to make sure that those two things are properly aligned. This image I'll resize to make a little bit smaller. And now we can see that those two things are aligned vertically. Again, if I turn off the guides, we won't see those in presentation mode, but we will see them as we're building our presentation. Another thing that we can use is the nudge feature in Google Slides. So if I show my guides again, what that means is that if I use my arrow keys, I can nudge things around until they're lined up. The last feature that we can use in Google Slides is literally the align feature. To do that, we're going to select all of the objects that we want to align. In this case, I'll just use my image and my shape. I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and click on both of those things. Then I'm going to go up to the Arrange toolbar, go to Align, and choose Top. And that's going to make both of those things aligned to the top of one another. I could do that same thing if I wanted them both aligned left, but that would put both of those objects layered together, which I probably don't want. The next principle we want to talk about is contrast. And contrast is something that we see in a few different ways. Contrast can be between the size of different elements. It can be between the color of different elements. And we can see contrast between the fonts that we use in a presentation as well. Contrast is important for a number of things, including readability and helping to understand how information is organized on a page, as well as the hierarchy of information of what's important and what is less important. We can use a few different tools to help us with contrast. We'll look at contrast between text color and background color, as well as some more subtle examples of contrast. For this, I'm going to come back to my sample presentation. I'm going to come over to this example slide right here, and I will add a title slide here. We'll call this My Awesome Presentation. Down here, I'm going to write just a sentence or two. Now, we could say that this has strong contrast because black on white text is extremely different from one another. The black color and the white color are extremely different from one another, so there's lots of contrast. However, a common mistake is that people want to change their background to something other than white, perhaps, and you might choose to use a very dark color, like a dark red. Now my text and my background have much less contrast. It's much harder to see that, especially that light gray against the red. Where people really start to get themselves into trouble is with light colored backgrounds and similarly light colored text. So I'm going to change my text color to something that is very similar to this, and you can see what I mean. There's almost no contrast between those elements, and that makes it really difficult to read and to understand what the presentation is actually trying to tell me. Another way that we can use contrast is in size. So if I have an element on the page that's this size and an element on the page that's this size, the photo here, we can tell that this one is probably more important simply because the size of this is so much bigger than this. Regardless of whatever else might be on this page or this slide, we can tell that the contrast between those two is pretty significant. So let's talk for just a minute about text and fonts. This is one place where people often feel uncertain and sometimes make choices that make their presentations difficult to read or to understand. There are several basic categories of fonts, including serif, sans serif, and decorative fonts. And font choices and sizes are really important, primarily because of readability, but also as a way to establish the hierarchy and the navigation within a presentation. So let's take a quick look at some ways that we can use fonts in our presentations. In this slide, I have a text box on the screen already, and I'm ready to type something in. The default font in Google Slides is Arial, which is a sans serif font. It doesn't have serifs, and it's a clean, modern-looking font. I might put another text box on the screen here and type some more information. This is a serif font. And if I select this, I can go up to my font menu and I can choose a different font. As this one says in its name, this is a serif font called Droid Serif. So sans serif and serif fonts have some contrast between them, and that can be really useful. For example, if I wanted the title of my presentation to really stand out and look clean and bold and modern, I might use a serifed font. Why you should drink coffee. And then for my subtitle of my presentation, I might choose to use a serifed font to add some contrast and understand what the hierarchy of that information is. A brief guide. Now, there's not a lot of contrast between these two because right now they're very much the same size. I'm going to start by changing the size of this that's going to be my title to something quite large like 60. And that might be a little too big. Now I can make this a bit bigger as well, since again, this is supposed to be a title slide. Maybe 400. Let's try 20 instead. So as we saw earlier, I still have those guidelines in here. One thing that you might notice is that as I dragged this around, that center guideline highlighted once I had that centered. Now this object isn't centered within that box, so let me go ahead and do that. I have my themes showing up here, so to give myself a little more real estate, I'm going to close that. And then I can see my alignment choices show up right here. I'm going to choose centered for this. And I'm going to center align this box of text as well by dragging it over until that red center box highlights. And I'm going to go ahead and center this as well. Now, using some principles that I learned from alignment, I'm going to bring these up a little bit closer. They're center aligned, so they have a nice relationship between one another. And I think what I might want to do is select both of those and drag those down on the slide until they're closer to the center as well. Now when I go into presentation mode, I see a nice bold title in a sans serif font and a subtitle in a serifed font.